So now that the Fed's come out and cut rates, we've officially entered into a new stage of the market cycle. And in today's video, we're going to have a look from a higher time frame what this means for the economy by having a look at what's previously happened during the last 3 cutting cycles over the last 25 years. And then we're going to tie this into crypto, discuss how we're trading Bitcoin moving forward and a lot of the altcoin market now that I believe we have entered into these final stages of the market cycle. So lots to cover in today's video, guys. So let's jump into it. So if you missed yesterday's meeting, Jerome Powell basically came out and said that the jobs market is slowing in the US, unemployment is slowly rising, and inflation has actually been going up month over month. So now the Fed's jumped in and finally cut interest rates, which most people will have you think is bullish for the market. However, if we have a look at this chart here, which is the Dow Jones Industrial Average over the course of the last 20 years, we can see in the blue here, every time the Fed has cut rates, from the time they've started cutting to the bottom, there has been significant corrections or crashes in the market. In 2020, we had COVID and lockdowns, which led to a market crash, but at the same time, we'd also seen the Fed go into a cutting cycle. Just like in 2008, we had the GFC, which was officially the banks that caused the crash, but no surprise, we were also in a cutting cycle for interest rates, which led to a 53% correction. And then back in 2000, we had the dot-com bubble, but no surprises here. We were also in the final stages of a cutting cycle, which did lead to a 37% correction. Now, the reason we're having a look and tying this to the stock market is because Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is just one section of the stock market. And if the economy's strong, then the stock market should be going up, and then smaller asset classes like crypto should also be going up. And that is what we have been seeing over the course of the last 6 to 12 months. But now that we start to see the US economy starting to slow down, that the amount of new jobs is slowing down, unemployment is on the rise, and inflation month over month is slowly starting to increase, we can see that there are problems in the US economy, and then the Fed has recognized that. And the way I perceive this cutting cycle is the Fed coming out and essentially saying that there are problems in the market. We are going to need to print money and stimulate the market soon. However, we do need low interest rates for that to happen, which is typically why when interest rates end up bottoming, we usually see the bottom of the stock market and the crash seems to be over. Just like we can see in our last 3 examples here, that when interest rates end up bottoming and flattening out here, the bottom is typically in for the stock market. It's just in that cutting cycle that we usually see a crash or a major correction. So what does this mean for crypto, and why am I actually so bullish right now? Now, typically at the end of a market cycle, what you'll see is price action actually play out like we've seen on XRP here in 2021, which is often referred to as a bubble pop or a blow off top. And this stage of the market only comes right at the end, right when everything's built up to a boiling point, and essentially the last of the juice is being extracted from the markets. And every time we've seen Bitcoin come in and put in a top, like we see back here during 2021, is when we see these big moves, just like how we've seen price action play out here on XRP during the same time period, which for those who weren't around, this lasted a total of about 10 days for it to shoot as high as 250%. And back in 2021, XRP by no means was one of the most bullish coins. Like we can see here during the exact same time period, something like Solana back in 2021 shot up as high as 850% over the course of about 50 days. And all of this ended up playing out as Bitcoin was putting in its top here. So if we are at the end of the market cycle and the Fed is starting to panic and cut rates now to prepare to be able to stimulate the economy because they see things getting worse in the near future, then it's most likely before that happens, we see some kind of blow off top here in crypto. And if we want to see a blow off top come from the cryptocurrency market here, what we typically want to see is the Bitcoin dominance breaking down, money flowing from the bigger cap coins into the smaller cap coins, which is exactly how we see things play out in 2021 here when the Bitcoin dominance broke down during this final stage for a course of about 46 days. And so far, if we have a look at how the Bitcoin dominance is playing out here, we have been breaking down since the start of July, which historically is what we want to see going into these final stages of the market cycle. So now that we've established a higher time frame perspective on how things are most likely going to play out in the market over the course of the next 60 days before things eventually come crashing down, it's most likely that we're not actually interested in Bitcoin here, and that the majority of our attention should be focused on the altcoin market, which, as you can see here, is edging right back at those all-time highs. And what we have marked out here in the blue is simply the way things reacted when we got back to these all-time highs back in 2021, when the altcoin market broke out, back tested the highs, and then we eventually seen that final stage of the alt season. And like discussed in previous videos, this second area here, when we've seen the total market cap excluding Bitcoin ended up pumping, most coins didn't actually set new all-time highs here. And we can see that if we overlay XRP here in the blue, you can see the high on XRP is set during this run up here, and there was no new high set on XRP during this second stage of the market cycle. If we remove XRP and put something like Dogecoin in here as well, you can see that the Dogecoin high was set at the same time the altcoin market peaked, but during this second rally here for the altcoin market, nothing came out of Doge, and we were already well and truly on our way into a bear market. And even if we overlay something like Binance coin here, which is one of the most bullish coins from 2021, we can see that during this time period here, it only barely just took out its previous all-time high before crashing down, and that the majority of the altcoins actually topped out back in May of 2021 here. And that if we are in a stage like this right now, where the altcoin market is edging back up against its previous all-time high, like it had set back here in 2018, then it's most likely what comes next is this final explosive stage, which you'd want to see at the end of a market cycle when Bitcoin is topping or has topped. Like we can see here, the majority of this run happened during this final stage here for Bitcoin in the red, when we can see that Bitcoin had pretty much topped and it was in that final distribution stage where it wasn't really putting in anything spectacular, and that the majority of the returns in the market were actually coming from the altcoins. So now that we're edging back on these same price levels where the altcoin market is back at the all-time high, how are we looking to trade this market? How long is left in this market? And what coins do we think will perform the best in these final stages? Now, one thing to note, when the altcoin market actually did break out from its previous all-time high in 2021 here, this entire move lasted about 90 days. So if we put that into perspective, that brings us to about mid-December. Now, personally, I don't think this market cycle and this final stage that we're going into is going to last that long. And personally, I'll be looking to exit a lot of my positions around that 60-day mark. Because again, if we have a look at XRP, which we can see in the blue here, XRP didn't actually top when the altcoin market topped. It topped right here at this stage, which was only about 65 days in, which is most likely the same level a lot of the altcoins are actually going to top at. But there will be a rotation in this final stage into something like meme coins or whatever's new and hot, which will likely see the majority of the price increase in this final stage. So a rough time guide of how long I think we have left here is about 60 to 90 days. So now let's jump into lower time frames here and have a look at how we see things actually playing out. Now, last week we compared Total 2, which is the altcoin market, and we said that if it was to continue to perform like Ethereum did when it was coming up to its previous all-time high back in 2021, what we would see is a little bit of chop at these levels before we could see a price eventually break out. And what ended up coming next from here was Ethereum broke out and back tested. And so far what we're seeing is price react pretty similar to this. However, I still think there is going to be a little bit more chop at these levels before we can actually see the breakout. And right now I think it's likely that we'll probably reject again, and the reason I think that's going to happen is because of our fractals here, which we talked about earlier in the week. Now, the first thing we discussed earlier this week was actually Bitcoin's price, and we did say last week that it was most likely, if things were to structurally follow the way they played out in 2021 here, Bitcoin was going to come up and sweep the highs that it had set back at this level, and then we were going to see the pullback. However, since then we haven't really seen Bitcoin sweep those highs. We've seen equal highs, and we are just chopping around at these levels here. So as far as short-term price action goes for Bitcoin, I'm in two minds whether we'll end up pushing higher and then rejecting down to that $112,000 level, or if the consolidation we've done here is good enough for Bitcoin to actually move higher. However, as far as I'm trading things personally, I'm going to stick with my previous bias, which was that we would see price eventually move down to this $112,000 region, which I'm then going to apply to the way I'm trading altcoins in the short term here. Now, moving into the first altcoin, which is XRP, what we can see here is the fractal from 2021 does point to XRP actually pushing up at this level, which we've seen play out in the last 24 hours. However, at some point we should see XRP roll over and spill down to the lows here at about $2.90. Now, this here is just a fractal. Price doesn't have to play out like this, and I'm not married to it. I'm equally as happy to see price move higher. However, I just think from a more conservative perspective, it is likely that we do see a little bit more of a pullback here, as I think Bitcoin is in for some kind of similar correction. And I'd be much more comfortable adding to a lot of my positions at lower price levels, and that right now where price is sitting, I'm just not happy taking any longs. And like discussed previously, our bias is obviously to the upside. However, where price currently sits at right now, I think that there is a higher percentage chance that we end up spilling over and forming some kind of ABC correction here for XRP, which obviously would line up with our Bitcoin price prediction, which is for Bitcoin to move to the downside, even though it does look quite strong at these levels right now. Now, if we move over to something like Dogecoin, which has been performing pretty well over the course of the last couple of weeks, we can see that Dogecoin has made it back to these price levels that I am interested in actually adding to my position. And from a higher time frame perspective, Dogecoin actually looks great here. But if we're to continue with our bias that we should start to see a little bit more of a correction in this market, that it's most likely Dogecoin will also follow suit with a lot of the other coins like Bitcoin and XRP, and we should see Dogecoin pull back down into these levels at around 24 cents, which is personally where I'll be happy to add to my positions. But if we look at some of the stronger performing coins here like Solana, I still think Solana will pull back with the rest of the market. However, it is showing a lot of strength here, and we might not see Solana's price roll over and come as low as what we're seeing play out for Bitcoin, XRP, and Dogecoin. However, the levels I'm looking at to add to my Solana position are at about $225 in this zone here. Speaking of strong coins, AVAX here continues to outperform, and I am looking to get my hands on some and enter a position here like we discussed earlier in the week. But when it comes to entering coins that are performing this strong, it's most likely that you'll have to time your entry based on how we see price play out for things like Bitcoin if they eventually do end up pulling back to this $112,000 price level. But this is one coin I'm definitely looking to add to my trading portfolio. Another coin I want to give a quick reference to here is actually SUI, which I am looking to enter at around $3.33, as we have found support on this level quite a few times. And if this low here ends up being a liquidity sweep and we can see SUI backtest this level and find support again one more time, this would be the level where I'd likely add a lot of SUI to my trading portfolio, as it usually performs quite well after Solana does. So guys, that's all the altcoins I'm currently looking to trade at the moment. And when it comes to adding to a lot of these positions, personally, I want to see Bitcoin pull back and hold $112,000 again before I feel a lot more comfortable adding, and then hopefully we can start to see price move to the upside from there. Which again, for something like XRP, this level here should be a pretty good level to look to add before price can move to the upside. However, I still think we have a little bit more consolidating to do here before price can move up, and then hopefully we can see this play out over the course of the next week. So guys, I believe we are officially now in these final stages of the market cycle. I think what Jerome Powell came out and said yesterday pretty much indicates that the American economy is starting to slow down, and we should see that negativity reflected in the stock market soon. However, before that can happen, it's most likely we see that blow off top like we typically see before a crash. But like we can see here, the stock market looks good. All the indexes here, the S&P, the Nasdaq, the Dow Jones, everything is sitting above its previous all-time highs. And most importantly here, the Russell actually tapped and rejected from its all-time high yesterday, which essentially is like the altcoin market for the stock market. And then I think if we can see this breakout here, which it looks like it's real close to doing, we should most likely see the altcoin market get taken with it, which again is what you typically see in the final stages of a market cycle. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to leave a like down below if you did. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. And if you have any questions about what we discussed today, feel free to drop them down below in the comment section. And I'll see you all in the next one.